Welcome back to another edition of the Throws Doc Podcast. I'm your doc, Dr. Charles Inferno. We're writing scripts to cure your throwing ailments. And today is Monday, March 20th. It's about 7 o'clock in the morning here. First day of spring. Beautiful sunrise behind me there on our way to school. Today I just wanted to talk actually about something I don't think I've talked about in years. I was watching a lot of college basketball this weekend with the boys. It's really interesting getting their perspective, or the perspective of a 9, 7, and 5-year-old when it comes to coaching and why they think the teams with the higher number one, meaning the lower seeded teams, why they beat teams essentially better than them. And getting their perspective is really interesting. And at night, after reading and things, talking with our 9-year-old, we were talking about coaching and how, from watching TV, he says, everyone coaches differently. And, some coaches yell a lot. He said some coaches don't. Some coaches just sit on the bench. And then some coaches, it's everybody. So I thought that was a really unique perspective from the mind of a 9-year-old who's consuming all this information and trying to figure out what's going on, right? But in conversation last night, he says, "Well, Daddy, how about you? How do you coach your throwers?" I thought that was really interesting because he's never really asked before. He's been to dozens and dozens of practices, but this is the analogy that I shared with him that I think is important to share with everybody, especially those who have never heard my definition before. But I consider my coaching style similar to Sherpa, right? So Sherpas assist people in climbing mountains and achieving goals, essentially, right? So with athletes, I think every thrower has their own, like, say, Mount Everest, right? That's something that they're trying to climb, something that they're trying to achieve, something that they're trying to accomplish. And Sherpas, in turn, dispel three things. They help the climbers along the way, right? The first thing is knowledge, right? So I think our job as coaches is to share knowledge with our athletes that's going to help them get where they want to go, get them to climb their own Everest, if you will. Two is teach them a certain skill set or skills. So in throwing, right, we obviously have the skills of turning or release or what have you, but they need certain tools in order to get on top of their Everest, right? There's certain technical model they need to really develop and gain expertise in order to get to their Everest. And the third one is support, right? When working with athletes, I always ask them what they want to accomplish and why. And sometimes you get through the middle of the season and that task may seem so daunting that athletes just really need somebody to put their arm around them and say, "Hey, listen, everything's going to be okay. Don't worry about getting to X. Let's get to B and C and D first before we look forward into that direction," right? Much like a Sherpa would work with one of their climbers, and they get to base camp and they look up. There's Everest, the peak, the top of the world, staring down at them, and they think that they can't make it. But Sherpa really, supports them in, let's get to Camp 1, let's get to Camp 2, let's get to Camp 3, let's make a push for the summit, right? That's essentially what I think, my coaching style is, my coaching philosophy, right? We want to embark as much knowledge as we can on our throwers. We want to share as much information as we can with them. Two, we want to teach them certain skills, provide them with that knowledge to teach them skills in order to be able to accomplish their goals, climb their Everest. And three, really, we just want to give them support, right? When they think that there is no hope or something seems unfathomable to try and accomplish, it's our job to put our arm around them and say, you know what, let's get to the next point first before we try and, essentially climb all the way to the top before we take this next step first. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of the Throws Doc Podcast. I'm your doc, Dr. Charles Inferna, and have a great day.